Hello, my name is Milo, and I will be your companion on this journey. For a little over the next hour, we will move very slowly, very gently, very softly into Jung's space of shadow work, not to analyze, but to allow your energy to return to where it truly belongs. Within each of us, there have likely been many moments when we walked away from a conversation without any argument, without any conflict, and yet inside, we felt empty, tired, and deeply exhausted. No one did anything wrong. No one is to blame. And there is no clear tragedy. You are simply tired in a way that is very difficult to name. Carl Gustav Jung believed that this kind of exhaustion is never accidental. Sometimes your energy is not lost through effort, but through unconscious processes quietly unfolding, where old complexes are stirred awake by the presence of someone familiar. Jung once wrote, "A complex can be so autonomous that it robs the ego of its energy." And if these words touch something within you, perhaps this is the moment when you no longer need to understand anything more. Daytime is for awareness, but nighttime is for rest. Right now, you do not need to do anything at all. Allow your body to relax upon the familiar bed, feel your breathing begin to slow, and permit your thoughts to gradually settle. When drowsiness arrives, you may gently drift into a deep, restorative sleep. And I will begin our journey very softly, very deeply. Yes, from the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the exhaustion experienced by modern human beings is not merely the result of working too much or resting too little. It goes deeper than that. It originates from the way psychic energy is operated, distributed, and in many cases, unconsciously drained. Jung used the concept of libido, not in the narrow Freudian sense of sexual drive, but as a universal life energy of the entire psyche. Libido is the force behind thought, emotion, creativity, faith, longing, and even spiritual development. When this energy flows freely and in an ordered way, a person feels alive, meaningful, and connected to themselves. But when it becomes fragmented, blocked, or dependent on external sources, inner life begins to wither, not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly and over time. One of Jung's key insights is that psychic energy never disappears. It only changes direction. When the ego is not strong enough to govern libido, or when unconscious complexes seize control, energy is drawn into autonomous psychological structures. Jung stated this very clearly. A complex can be so autonomous that it robs the ego of its energy. Collected Works, Volume 8, Here Jung is not describing a deliberate act, but an inner process. A complex formed from emotional memories, trauma, or unresolved conflicts can operate like an independent entity within the psyche. When this happens, the ego gradually loses its agency, and life energy is siphoned off to sustain that unconscious structure. The person feels tired, unmotivated, yet cannot understand why. From this foundation, Jung helps us re-examine what is now commonly called the phenomenon of the energy vampire. Through the lens of analytical psychology, these are not malicious individuals intentionally draining others, but people who are unable to generate inner energetic stability on their own. Their libido is not anchored in the self. It drifts uncentered. As a result, they unconsciously seek supplementation from the outside through attention, emotional reactions, salvation, or the sacrifice of others. What is crucial is this: the process is usually mutual. The person who is drained is not entirely a passive victim. Often their ego is weak at some point, lacking boundaries, lacking inner authority, or caught in a savior role. Jung warned that when the ego cannot hold its ground, the unconscious will take over. Where the will of the ego is weak, there the unconscious will overpower it. At that point, psychic energy is no longer used for growth or creativity, but is consumed within repetitive relationships where neither side truly matures. Jung also expanded this issue beyond the individual. In modern society, libido is further dispersed by the collective social media, constant comparison pressure to conform. He referred to this as the dissolution of the individual into the collective psyche, where people lose their inner center. When life energy is absorbed by the crowd, individuals feel exhausted, yet empty, busy, yet meaningless. At the heart of Jung's thought lies. This principle, exhaustion, is not a sign of weakness. It is a signal. It indicates that libido has gone astray. And the task of the individual is not to seek more energy from the outside, but to make the unconscious conscious. Jung emphasized, what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. When psychic energy is bound within unrecognized complexes, it continues to govern a person's life like an unnamed destiny. But once identified, that energy can be released and reintegrated. From here, Jung does not offer simplistic advice, such as avoid energy-draining people. Instead, he proposes a deeper path, individuation, the process of becoming whole. When the ego learns to dialogue with the shadow, when libido is re-anchored in the self, a person no longer needs to draw energy from others, nor are they easily drained. Life energy then ceases to be something guarded in fear and becomes a stable, self-generating, and meaningful flow. Thus, through a Jungian lens, the phenomenon of the energy vampire is not a moral issue, but a psychological tragedy. It reflects a culture in which individuals have become estranged from their inner center, and exhaustion, painful as it is, becomes the deepest invitation of all to return inward, to face the shadow, and to reclaim sovereignty over one's own life energy. After understanding that depleted psychic energy is not a random phenomenon, but the consequence of unconscious processes that have not yet been recognized, we can move into a deeper layer, the layer of the human being who stands on the other side of that exhaustion. Because if energy can be drained, then an equally important question arises: who is doing the draining, and why must they do so? Here, the thought of Carl Gustav Jung opens a perspective entirely different from conventional morality. The energy drainer is not evil. They are incomplete. In analytical psychology, Jung was extremely cautious about placing moral labels on psychological phenomena. He did not divide people into good and bad in a moral sense, but viewed them as psychic structures existing at different stages of development. When someone leaves us exhausted, Jung does not ask, "How bad are they?" but rather, which part of them has not yet been lived? The answer most often lies in the shadow, the dark region of the psyche that contains needs, conflicts, emotions, and instincts that have not been consciously accepted. Jung defined the shadow not as evil, but as that which has not yet been lived consciously. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." Collected Works, Volume 9, Part 2. When the shadow is not integrated, it does not disappear. It seeks expression. And one of its most common paths of expression is through other people, those who have not completed the process of individuation. The process of becoming whole are often unable to generate inner stability on their own. Their libido is not anchored in the self, but caught between the persona, the social mask, and the shadow, the rejected part. In such a state, the psyche seeks balance by the shortest possible route, relying on the energy of others. This explains why many so-called energy drainers carry no malicious intent. They do not wake up each morning intending to exhaust someone else. On the contrary, they are often deeply wounded, deeply insecure, and unconsciously searching for stability through the attention emotions, sacrifice, or savior role of another. Jung emphasized that the unconscious does not operate according to morality, but according to the principle of compensation. When a part of the psyche is starved, it will attempt to feed itself. Here, Jung issues an important warning. When a person's ego is weak or lacks clear boundaries, the unconscious takes control. He wrote, "Where the will of the ego is weak, there the unconscious will overpower it. An incomplete individual often has a weak ego in this sense. Not weak, as in fragile, but insufficiently structured to contain inner conflict. They cannot remain alone with themselves. They need others to reflect them, to carry emotions for them, to hold the shadow they have not yet dared to face. And it is precisely in this process that the other person begins to feel exhausted. One of the subtleties in Jung's thinking is this: the one who drains energy and the one who is drained often belong to the same psychological field. A person can become an energy source for another only when they themselves carry a corresponding shadow. Often a need to be needed, to be recognized, or to play the role of the savior. Jung referred to this as a meeting of complexes. When two complexes resonate, a relationship forms not on the level of consciousness, but on the level of the unconscious. Jung described this phenomenon as follows: complexes are psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies. Collected Works, Vol. 8. When these fragments meet, they form a self-operating system. The energy drainer no longer needs to exert effort. They merely need to be present. And the one being drained does not need to be coerced. They give automatically. This is not the fault of any individual, but the tragedy of psyches that have not yet been integrated. Jung also emphasized that modern society intensifies this condition. Culture encourages a strong persona image, role success, while offering little space for the shadow. The result is an increasing number of people who live far from their inner center. Outwardly, they appear stable. Inwardly, they lack support. And when support is missing, the psyche seeks someone else to lean on. Yet Jung does not allow us to stop at compassion alone. He does not advocate accepting being drained as a moral virtue. Instead, he makes it clear that individuation is a personal responsibility. Each person must confront their own shadow. No one can live another's unconscious life for them. Jung wrote a famously quoted line: "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Collected Works, Volume 13. The energy drainer can only stop draining when they are courageous enough to turn inward and face their own lack, fear, and shadow. And the one being drained can only be free when they relinquish the unconscious role that has kept them there. The role of the savior, the one who endures, the one who always gives. Thus, when seen through a Jungian lens, we no longer ask, who is right? Who is wrong? We ask, instead, who is not yet living fully? And this answer opens not judgment, but inner responsibility. The energy drainer is not evil. They are a living reminder that an incomplete psyche will always seek to complete itself, even if it does so by harming others. When this is understood, there is no longer a need for hatred or fearful avoidance. We begin to see relationships as mirrors, places where the shadows of both sides are reflected. And it is precisely at this point of intersection that the true journey of individuation begins, not by cutting people out of one's life, but by becoming whole from within, so that no one must live on another's energy ever again. After understanding that energy drainers are not evil, but rather psyches that are incomplete, we arrive at the most dangerous mechanism that makes exhaustion persistent and so difficult to escape. Projection, unconscious projection. It is here that life energy is not only drained, but misplaced, causing one person to carry a psychological burden that does not truly belong to them. In Carl Gustav Jung's analytical psychology, projection is not a moral failing, but a defense mechanism of the unconscious. When an emotion, conflict, or desire is too painful to accept, the psyche pushes it outward and perceives it in another person. Jung described this mechanism with striking clarity. Projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. Collected Works, Volume 10. In other words, the one who projects is not truly seeing you. They are seeing their own unconscious content, but wearing your face. And when this happens, you are no longer encountered as an independent human being. You become a container. The danger of projection lies in its subtlety. There are no open accusations, no clear conflicts, only a vague sense that when you are with someone, you must carry more, endure more, stabilize more on their behalf. You leave quietly, yet carry with you an exhaustion you cannot name. Jung explained that when projection is active, the boundaries between psyches dissolve. And when boundaries disappear, psychic energy flows in the wrong direction. What makes projection the most dangerous energy-draining mechanism is that it does not require your conscious consent. A single weak point in the ego, a need to be recognized, to be loved, to be the good one, is enough for another person's unconscious to attach itself. Jung warned, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Collected Works, Volume 7. But the reverse is also true. Everything others refuse to see in themselves will seek expression through you. When they cannot hold their anger, you become too sensitive. When they cannot face their vulnerability, you become not strong enough. When they carry shame, you feel guilty for them without knowing why. On an energetic level, projection is an act of transference. The one who projects lightens their inner burden by placing it onto someone else's shoulders. Jung identified this as the consequence of failing to make the unconscious conscious. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Collected Works, Volume 10. In relationships dominated by projection, your life can feel as though it is being steered from the outside. You react, adapt, correct yourself, not because you choose to, but because an unconscious role has been assigned to you. What is particularly painful is this: those who are projected onto are often people with a high capacity to contain. They know how to listen. They have empathy. They can tolerate heavy emotions. Yet these very qualities make them fertile ground for projection. Jung did not see this as weakness, but he emphasized that the capacity to contain without boundaries inevitably leads to exhaustion. From a Jungian perspective, projection cannot be dismantled through argument or proof. You cannot explain someone out of projecting, because projection does not reside in consciousness. It dissolves only when the one who projects takes their material back, something that happens only when they enter the process of individuation. Jung wrote, "Individuation is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, that is a separate, indivisible unity, or whole." Collected Works, Volume 7. When a person is not whole, they need others to complete themselves. When projection is active, you become a missing piece for that lack. But this completion is illusory. It only further distorts the flow of energy. On the side of the one being drained, Jung does not ask, "Why are they doing this to you?" He asks a harder question: which part of you allows this to happen? Because projection attaches only where there is unconscious resonance. Often this is your own shadow, the part that wants to be needed, the part that fears abandonment, the part that equates self-worth with endurance. When two shadows meet, projection becomes the bridge. Therefore, the Jungian solution does not lie in avoiding people, but in withdrawing projection. The moment you recognize, "This feeling is not mine," a portion of your energy immediately returns. No confrontation is required. No severing is necessary. Only recognition. Jung believed that recognition itself is the deepest healing act. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. When you are no longer an unconscious container for another person, they are forced to face themselves or to leave. And when projection dissolves, the relationship either transforms or ends. Both outcomes are expressions of psychological truth. Projection, therefore, is not only the most dangerous energy-draining mechanism, it is also a gateway to inner freedom. For the moment, you stop carrying a psychological burden that was never yours. Life energy begins to return to its rightful place. And there, the process of individuation continues no longer through others, but through yourself. After clearly recognizing projection as the most dangerous mechanism that turns us into containers for the unconscious of others, we reach a more subtle layer, a place where exhaustion no longer comes from another person's behavior, but from our own loss of ego boundaries. Jung called this state identification, an unconscious merging in which the ego dissolves into the psyche of another. In Carl Gustav Jung's thought, identification is not love, nor is it pure empathy. It is a confusion of identity. When the ego is weak, insufficiently formed, not yet firmly established in its relationship with the self, a person becomes highly susceptible to identifying with the emotions, problems, and even the fate of others. Jung regarded this as one of the deep-rooted causes of prolonged identity loss and chronic energetic exhaustion. Jung wrote that the ego is only a small center of consciousness within the total psyche. When the ego is not strong enough to distinguish what belongs to me and what belongs to another, psychological boundaries dissolve. And when boundaries disappear, psychic energy can no longer be distributed correctly. A person does not merely care about another's problems, they become those problems. Jung warned with great clarity, identification with the object produces a state of unconsciousness. Collected Works, Volume 7. Here the object is not merely another person, but the entire emotional field and conflict structure that person carries. When identification occurs, you are no longer standing outside, observing, or choosing. You react, worry, and adjust as though the issue were your own. And it is precisely in this unconscious state that life energy is continuously depleted. In intimate relationships, family romantic bonds, or deep emotional connections, identification occurs even more easily. Closeness blurs boundaries. Jung did not deny the necessity of attachment, but he drew a sharp distinction between relatedness and fusion. When two psyches fuse, neither remains fully themselves. Jung emphasized, the more a man's life is shaped by the collective norm, the greater is his individual immorality. Collected Works, Volume 10. This statement applies not only to society, but also to two-person relationships. When an individual loses their inner center in order to live according to another's needs, emotions, or crises, a form of inner immorality emerges not in a moral sense, but as a betrayal of one's own identity. Identification is often disguised under beautiful names sacrifice, understanding, being there no matter what. But Jung saw the psychological cost. When the ego identifies with another libido, is no longer available for personal development. It becomes trapped in maintaining stability for the other person. Over time, the identifying individual feels empty, exhausted, and no longer knows who they are. A form of depletion, deeper than physical fatigue. Jung viewed identification as an early and necessary phase of psychological development, especially in childhood. But when it persists into adulthood, it becomes a serious obstacle to individuation. He wrote, "The goal of individuation is nothing less than to divest the self of the false wrappings of the persona." Collected Works, Volume 7. Here persona does not only mean the social mask, but also the unconscious roles we wear in order to be loved, accepted, or needed. Many people identify with roles such as the strong one, the healer, or the one who carries everything. But these roles, when unconscious, devour life energy. The subtlety is this identification often follows projection. When another person projects their pain onto you, as described earlier, and your ego boundaries are not sufficiently defined, you begin to believe it is your responsibility. From there, projection is maintained through identification. You do not merely contain their emotions, you live on their behalf. Jung described this as a form of psychic participation mystique, where two psyches become unconsciously entangled. Jung warned that if this state persists, a person loses contact with the self, the total center of the psyche. And when the self is obscured, psychic energy has no source of renewal. He famously wrote, "The unconscious can make a fool of you in no time." Identification is precisely the way the unconscious takes command by convincing you that losing yourself is a virtue. The Jungian solution is not emotional coldness or rigid separation. Jung did not advocate isolation. Instead, he emphasized strengthening the ego so that fusion is no longer necessary. A strong ego is not a controlling ego, but one that knows who it is and who it is not. When boundaries are restored, psychic energy begins to return to its proper place. Jung believed that every time you recognize, "This emotion is not mine," a small step of individuation has already taken place. And every time you refuse to identify with another person's problem, you do not become indifferent. You become more whole. He wrote, "Individuation does not shut one out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself." Collected Works, Volume 8. Only when you no longer lose yourself in others can you truly be present in relationship. Energy is no longer drained to sustain a false fusion. Instead, It nourishes genuine presence, where two people stand side by side without overlap, without carrying one another's burdens. Identification, therefore, is not only a mechanism of exhaustion, it is also a crucial threshold of psychological maturity. By crossing it, one learns a profound Jungian truth. Love does not require the loss of self, and only when the ego is held firmly can life energy flow on sustained, unborrowed, and without self-sacrifice. After seeing how identification causes a person to lose the boundaries of the ego, dissolving into the emotions, problems, and fate of others, a more subtle danger gradually emerges. Here the ego no longer melts away, but swells. One no longer loses oneself in another, but places oneself above another. Jung called this state psychic inflation, the psychological swelling that becomes the most dangerous trap for those who carry the role of the savior. In the analytical psychology of Carl Gustav Jung, psychic inflation is not simple arrogance. It occurs when the ego identifies with contents that exceed its capacity to contain most often powerful archetypes, such as the savior, the sacrificial one, or the martyr. Jung warned that when the ego confuses itself with collective unconscious forces, the individual loses the psychological humility necessary to keep life energy in balance. Jung wrote a key sentence about this phenomenon. Inflation is an extension of the ego beyond its proper limits, a state of being puffed up. Collected Works, Vol. 7. When inflation occurs, a person feels responsible for the inner lives of others. They believe that if they do not appear, do not help, do not endure, everything will collapse. On the surface, this looks like compassion. But at a deeper level, it is an unconscious identification with power. The power to heal, the power to save, the power to suffer on behalf of others. The danger lies in the fact that psychic inflation is often socially rewarded. The one who is always there, the one who sacrifices silently, the one who carries everything, is praised as noble. But Jung saw the psychological cost. When the ego expands to carry what belongs either to the self or to others, psychic energy is consumed at a breathtaking rate. The individual no longer gives from fullness, but from the fear of losing value if they do not give. Jung emphasized that inflation always comes with imbalance. The ego believes itself to be strong, but is in fact being manipulated by the unconscious. He wrote, "The inflated consciousness is egocentric and conscious of nothing but its own existence." Collected Works, Vol. 9, Part 1. In this state, the savior does not truly see the other as an independent individual. They see a role that requires their appearance. The other becomes a victim, so that they may be the rescuer, becomes the weak one so that they may be the strong one. The relationship is no longer an encounter between two human beings, but a stage upon which an archetype performs. One central point Jung consistently emphasized is that inflation is never a sign of true strength. On the contrary, it is an expression of a weak ego. Weak to the point that it must borrow the power of the unconscious in order to feel valuable. Jung wrote very clearly, the stronger and more numerous the complexes, the more egocentric the individual. Collected Works. Volume 8. Those who fall into the savior trap often carry a complex related to self-worth. They feel they exist only when they are needed. And thus, they give excessively, not out of love, but out of the need to be recognized. They become martyrs, not because anyone forces them to, but because their unconscious demands it in order to maintain a sense of meaning. Here, exhaustion does not arise from giving itself, but from giving with a distorted motive. Jung did not oppose compassion, but he drew a clear distinction between service and inflationary sacrifice. When sacrifice arises from inflation, it always demands an invisible reward, gratitude, dependence, or the feeling of being irreplaceable. Jung warned that inflation inevitably leads to collapse, for the ego cannot indefinitely carry a role that exceeds its limits. He wrote, "Every form of inflation ends in a fall." Collected Works. Volume 12. This fall often manifests as chronic exhaustion, depression, bitterness, or a sense of betrayal when others no longer need you. And the most painful part is this: the Savior feels they have given everything, yet received nothing, because from the beginning, the relationship was built upon an illusion of power. From a Jungian perspective, the way out does not lie in stopping the act of helping others, but in withdrawing inflation. Jung called this process the deflation of the ego, returning the ego to its proper size. The ego does not need to be small, but it must be in the right place. Jung wrote, "The ego must be related to something other than itself. Otherwise, it becomes inflated." Collected Works, Volume 7. When the ego learns to step back, the self gains space to operate. And then, a person can help others without losing their life energy. They give not because they need to be needed, but because inner fullness allows it. Psychic inflation, therefore, is one of the shortest paths to exhaustion. Not because love is tiring, but because love has been hijacked by the ego. Jung did not call on us to abandon compassion, but invited us to something more difficult, to relinquish the illusion that we are the center of another person's healing process. When the Savior accepts that they are not the Savior, something remarkable happens. Energy returns. No more swelling, no more collapse. There remains only a human being standing firmly within their own ego, able to be present, able to love without sacrificing their own inner life. And this is precisely the deepest step of maturity that Jung called true individuation. And once we have clearly seen psychic inflation as the trap that exhausts human beings through the illusion of being a savior, where the ego swells to carry what lies far beyond its limits, we are compelled to widen the lens beyond personal relationships. For there exists a source of energy depletion that is far more powerful, more subtle, and far harder to escape the collective psychological field of modern society. Jung called this invisible foundation the collective unconscious, and it is here that exhaustion is no longer the story of an individual, but the symptom of an entire era. In Carl Gustav Jung's system of thought, the collective unconscious is not an abstract or mystical idea. It is the deepest layer of the psyche, containing archetypes, universal patterns of human experience: the hero, the victim, the victor, the outcast, the savior. When an individual lives too close to the collective, without a stable inner center, they are no longer merely interacting with people around them. They are drawn into the archetypal forces moving within the crowd. Jung warned of this phenomenon very early on. He called it psychic infection, collective psychological contamination. He wrote, "Through identification with the collective, man falls into a state of unconsciousness." Collected Works, Volume 10. In modern society, this infection no longer requires public squares or physical crowds. It unfolds minute by minute, hour by hour, through social media, mass communication ideologies, and constant comparison. People do not merely see others. They absorb the psychological states of the collective anxiety, outrage, desire, the fear of being left behind. And psychic energy is drained not by any single individual, but by the entire unconscious field vibrating around them. Those who are psychologically sensitive are especially prone to exhaustion because they possess a high capacity for resonance. They feel the emotional atmosphere of the age, the zeitgeist, more intensely than others. Jung described this phenomenon as follows: the individual is influenced unconsciously by the collective psyche. Collected Works, Volume 8. When an individual is not firmly anchored in the self, their libido is drawn outward, not toward inner development, but toward reacting to the collective. Every news item, every public debate, every image of comparison activates an archetype. The successful one the failure, the righteous, the wrongdoer. And in this process, life energy is fragmented into hundreds of small, continuous reactions, never fully restored. Jung perceived this danger with exceptional clarity, especially during periods of social upheaval. He wrote a striking line: "The mass crushes out the insight and reflection that are still possible with the individual." Collected Works, Volume 10. When human beings live too close to the crowd, their capacity for inner reflection is suffocated. They believe they are caring, staying informed, or standing on the right side. But in reality, they are expending libido merely to remain attuned to the collective rhythm. This is a form of psychic inflation on a societal scale. The individual ego dissolves into a vast collective ego, and life energy is drawn into it. The paradox is this: modern society glorifies connection, yet produces a nameless, chronic exhaustion. Jung explained this paradox through a simple principle. The human psyche is not designed to process excessive collective stimulation all at once. When libido is continuously pulled outward, the self, the regulating center, is left without space to regenerate energy. Jung wrote, "The more the ego is identified with the collective, the more it loses its individual meaning." Collected Works, Volume 7. And when the individual loses inner meaning, they attempt to compensate through comparison achievement and external validation, all of which drain even more energy. A cycle of exhaustion emerges, not because human beings are weak, but because they live within an unconscious field that is too loud. Jung did not frame this as a simple fault of technology or society. He saw it as a challenge of individuation in an age of extreme collectivization. When individuals fail to develop a living relationship with the self, they are forced to borrow energy from the collective in order to feel that they exist. The price they pay is prolonged fatigue, disorientation, and the sense of being drained, even when doing nothing in particular. The Jungian solution is not physical withdrawal from society, but the withdrawal of unconscious identification with the collective. Jung emphasized that individuals must reestablish boundaries between the ego and the collective psyche. He wrote, "Individuation is a differentiation from the collective psychology." Collected Works, Volume 7. When a person learns to stand within society without being swallowed by it, psychic energy begins to return. The sensitive individual no longer has to carry the emotional atmosphere of an entire era. They may still care, still connect, but they are no longer swept into the unconscious oscillations of the crowd. Thus, exhaustion in modern society is not merely a matter of rest or work-life balance. In Jung's light, it is a warning from the psyche itself that human beings have lived too far from their inner center, and the path of recovery does not lie in seeking more stimulation or recognition, but in returning to the self, where libido is naturally renewed. The collective unconscious is not the enemy. It is the shared foundation of humanity. But when individuals lose their identity within it, exhaustion becomes inevitable. Jung did not invite us to abandon the world, but to undertake something far more difficult: to live within the world without losing one's soul. And only then does life energy cease to be drained by society, not because society is evil, but because the individual has finally found where they truly belong. Once we expand our perspective from the individual ego to the field of the collective unconscious, where modern society itself becomes a vast source of energy depletion, we arrive at an even subtler layer, harder to recognize, and often the most exhausting of all psychic resonance: the invisible emotional resonance between human beings. At this level, no words are required, no obvious actions. Mere proximity is enough for energy to begin exchanging. In the thought of Carl Gustav Jung, the human psyche is not a closed system. It is a living field, constantly interacting with other fields. Jung did not use the term energy field in the modern physical sense, yet he described this nature with great clarity through the concept of participation. Mystique, a primordial psychological state in which the boundaries between psyches are not yet fully differentiated. He wrote, "Participation mystique is a psychological condition in which there is no differentiation between subject and object." Collected Works, Volume 6. Although modern humans have developed an ego, the remnants of this state have never disappeared. They have only become more subtle. When two people are close to one another, especially in intimate relationships or emotionally dense environments, their psyches can resonate, not by will, but by emotional frequency. This is where many people experience a form of exhaustion that is extraordinarily difficult to explain. There is no argument, no conflict. No one has done anything wrong. Yet after leaving, you feel heavy, drained, as though you have carried something that never belonged to you. Jung did not view this as weakness, but as high psychological sensitivity, the capacity to receive the unconscious states of others. Jung observed that emotions do not reside solely within individuals. They possess a contagious psychological quality. He wrote, "Emotions are instinctive, involuntary reactions which upset the rational order of consciousness by their elementary outbursts." Collected Works, Volume 9. Part 1. When someone carries inner turmoil, anxiety suppressed, anger, unnamed, grief, those emotions do not remain contained. They radiate outward, like a signal, and a person with an open psyche, with insufficient boundaries, will resonate with that signal. Not because they choose to, but because their unconscious picks it up. What matters is this psychic resonance does not require conscious consent. You do not need to actively empathize. You only need to be present. Jung emphasized that the unconscious communicates directly with the unconscious, without the mediation of rational thought. He wrote, "The unconscious is not only influenced by the conscious mind, but also by other unconscious minds." Collected Works, Volume 8. Here energy is depleted, not because you solve another person's problems, but because you stabilize their emotional field for them. Your quiet presence becomes a refuge for chaos they cannot yet contain. And when this happens repeatedly, exhaustion accumulates, without a clear cause, without a dramatic breaking point, only a slow erosion. Psychic resonance is especially strong in relationships where projection and identification have already occurred. When you have grown accustomed to containing another's emotions, your psyche learns to do so automatically. Jung described this as the formation of an autonomously operating complex. He wrote, "A complex can be so autonomous that it robs the ego of its energy." Collected Works, Volume 8. At this point, resonance is no longer a temporary phenomenon. It becomes a psychological role. You enter a room, and your energy begins to adjust to someone else. You leave carrying emotional residue that is not yours. This is why many sensitive individuals feel exhausted, even when they have done nothing. Jung did not regard this phenomenon as pathological. He saw it as a reminder of the limits of the ego. When the ego is sufficiently defined, psychic resonance still occurs, but it does not lead to invasion. When the ego is weak or fatigued, resonance becomes unconscious intrusion, and life energy is expended to maintain equilibrium in a system that does not belong to you. The Jungian solution does not lie in blocking emotions or becoming indifferent. Jung did not advocate emotional closure. Instead, he emphasized strengthening the relationship between the ego and the self, the regulating center of the psyche. When the ego is anchored in the self, it can sense without absorbing, be present without dissolving. Jung wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious." Collected Works, Volume 12. When the self functions as the center, psychic energy is no longer drawn outward to stabilize others. Sensitive individuals do not lose their subtlety, but they no longer pay for it with exhaustion. They learn to recognize. This emotion is passing through me, but it does not belong to me. Psychic resonance, therefore, is not an enemy. It is evidence that human beings are more deeply connected than we often realize. But without inner boundaries, that connection becomes a burden. Jung did not invite us to sever resonance, but to stand firmly within it. When you can be near chaos without being pulled into it, close to sorrow, without carrying it home, you have taken a profound step along the path of individuation. And at that point, life energy begins to return, not because the world has become less chaotic, but because your psyche has finally found a center strong enough not to vibrate with every external fluctuation. Psychic resonance, when made conscious, becomes a deep capacity, the ability to be fully present without losing oneself. And this is precisely the most refined form of maturity Carl Jung ever described a human being who can feel the world, yet is no longer drained of life energy by it. If psychic resonance reveals how we can unconsciously absorb the emotions of others, then psychic immaturity exposes the deeper reason why some people continually need others in order to survive psychologically. Not because they are bad, not because they are malicious, but because they are not yet mature enough to carry themselves. In the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung, maturity is not measured by age status or social adaptability. A person may function smoothly in society, be successful, even well-loved, and yet remain psychologically immature if they have never truly faced their shadow and still live primarily through their persona. The persona, according to Jung, is the mask we need in order to exist in the world. But when a person becomes fully identified with the persona, they lose contact with their genuine inner life. They no longer know who they are without feedback, without attention, without recognition, and from this loss, a quiet hunger emerges, a hunger for validation, for emotional supply, for external support. Jung warned early on about this condition when he wrote, "The persona is a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. When the true nature is concealed for too long, a person loses the ability to regulate emotions from within. They cannot soothe themselves. They cannot stabilize themselves. They cannot contain sadness, anxiety, or emptiness on their own. And at that point, other people become substitute sources of energy. This is the woo of energy draining in the context of psychic immaturity. The psychologically immature person does not know that they are draining energy. To them, it feels like connection, sharing, needing one another. But on the unconscious level, they are using others as external regulators, outsourcing emotional containment to an environment their inner world cannot yet provide. Jung described this as a sign that the individual has not yet entered the process of individuation, the process of becoming whole. He wrote, "Individuation means becoming a single, homogeneous being. And insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. A person who has not individuated has no one's own self to anchor into. They drift through the emotions, reactions, and expectations of others. And because they lack an inner center, they must borrow psychic energy from their surroundings simply to exist. This explains why psychologically immature individuals often need to be listened to constantly, but cannot listen in return, require frequent reassurance, but rarely self-soothe, feel empty when alone, and leave those around them feeling inexplicably exhausted, not because they are bad, but because they do not yet have enough inner space to be alone with themselves. Jung once made a piercing observation about the relationship between inner immaturity and unconscious dependence. Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. For the psychologically immature, they often do not yet know what is truly important to them. And so, they cling to others' emotions, others' reactions, others' needs, as a way of shaping an identity. Here, a painful paradox emerges. The less inner strength a person has, the more unconsciously they drain energy. And the more sensitive a person is, the more easily they become a source. This is why Jung never simply advised us to avoid or cut off such people. He always looked at the problem from both sides. For if we are repeatedly drained by psychologically immature individuals, it suggests that there is also a part of us willing to occupy that role. Perhaps the shadow of the rescuer, the sufferer, or the one who needs to be needed. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Another person's psychic immaturity becomes a burden only when it connects with a blind spot within us. When we are not yet strong enough to say enough, not centered enough to resist being pulled into others' needs, we remain trapped in relationships that exhaust us. Yet it is precisely here that the path of healing begins, not through judgment, but through consciousness. As a person matures psychologically, they no longer need others to fill inner emptiness. They can be alone without collapsing. They can feel sadness without requiring someone else to carry it. And at that point, they no longer consume energy from their environment. They begin to generate energy from within. This is the sign of a psyche that is growing. And when you begin to recognize that your exhaustion does not come from weakness, but from having spent too long beside psychologically immature structures, you stop blaming yourself. You stop trying to fix others, and your energy slowly begins to return to you. Because, as Jung emphasized, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and psychological maturity, yours or anyone else's, always begins with taking responsibility for one's own inner life, rather than unconsciously borrowing others in order to live. Once we have recognized psychic immaturity, the psychological immaturity that forces people to borrow emotions, support, and validation from the outside, another clarity emerges. Exhaustion does not arise only from isolated phenomena, but from recurring psychological patterns. Jung called these patterns archetypes, universal forms of the psyche that operate quietly, yet persistently. And within the context of energy draining, certain archetypes appear with such frequency that we can recognize them almost immediately upon entering a relationship. They are not moral labels, but unconscious configurations that have not yet taken responsibility for their inner life. In Carl Gustav Jung's analytical psychology, archetypes are neither good nor bad. They are primordial sources of energy. When they are made conscious and integrated, they become strengths. When they are denied or lived unconsciously, they turn into energy-draining mechanisms, not out of malice, but out of avoidance of inner responsibility. The eternal victim. The victim archetype is not merely someone who has been wounded. It is someone who identifies their identity with their wound. They live within a narrative in which life is always unfair. Others always hurt them, and therefore they have no obligation to change anything within themselves. Jung recognized here an autonomous complex one that feeds the ego through helplessness. He warned that when a complex takes control, psychic energy is withdrawn from the ego. A complex can be so autonomous that it robs the ego of its energy. Collected Works, Volume 8. Those carrying the victim archetype rarely ask directly. Instead, they tell their story repeatedly, reliving their pain as an unconscious invitation for others to carry it for them. Energy is drained, not through coercion, but through prolonged empathy. And because they refuse to reclaim inner agency, the cycle of exhaustion never ends. The narcissist. In Jungian psychology, narcissism is not simply self-love. It is often the shell of a wounded self. The narcissistic individual requires constant attention, admiration, and feedback to sustain a sense of existence. Inside, they lack a stable inner center. Jung analyzed that when the ego inflates to compensate for inner emptiness, this is a form of psychic inflation. Inflation is an extension of the ego beyond its proper limits. Collected Works, Volume 7. The narcissist drains energy by occupying attention. The relationship revolves around them. Their emotions take precedence. The needs of others shrink. The core issue is not that they are bad, but that they cannot nourish self-worth from within. And so, they take energy from others as a substitute fuel. The complainer, the martyr, the passive-aggressive. These are the most subtle archetypes. They do not demand openly. They sacrifice, endure, and then silently accumulate resentment. Outwardly moral, inwardly avoidant of the shadow. Jung described the shadow as a moral challenge to the ego. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Collected Works, Volume 9, Part 2. When the shadow is not acknowledged, it seeks indirect expression. The martyr gives excessively, and then uses that sacrifice as emotional leverage. Energy is drained not through attention, but through the guilt of others. And because they refuse to speak directly or take responsibility for their needs, the relationship becomes a prolonged field of depletion. The common thread: avoidance of inner responsibility. Whether victim, narcissist, or martyr, the commonality lies not in behavior, but in inner stance, the avoidance of responsibility. Jung emphasized that maturity begins when a person reclaims their unconscious material. Individuation means becoming one's own self. Collected Works, Volume 7. When an archetype operates unconsciously, the individual is no longer the subject of their psychological life. They blame circumstances, other people, or fate. And when responsibility is not reclaimed, energy must come from outside. The subtle truth is this: these archetypes drain energy only when they encounter a matching resonance. Highly sensitive, empathic individuals, or those carrying the rescuer's shadow, often become the supply. Jung reminded us that every relationship is a two-way mirror. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Collected Works, Volume 7. Recognizing archetypes is not about judgment or labeling. It is about withdrawing energy from unconscious roles. When a person begins to take responsibility for their inner life, the archetype loses power. The victim learns to act. The narcissist learns to listen. The martyr learns to speak their needs. And when that has not yet occurred, maintaining boundaries is not cruelty. It is respect for the individuation process of both sides. Thus, understanding energy-draining archetypes does not make us colder. It makes us clearer. We can feel compassion without dissolving, be present without being depleted. And at that point of clarity, life energy begins to return, no longer consumed by unconscious roles, but devoted to a deeper task, becoming oneself. After identifying the typical energy-draining archetypes, the eternal victim, the narcissist, the passive-aggressive martyr, a deeper question naturally arises. Why do we keep entering these relationships again and again? Here Jung no longer looks toward the other. He turns the lens back toward us, for in his view, no draining can occur without an inner resonance, and the center of that resonance is the shadow. In Carl Gustav Jung's analytical psychology, the shadow is not pure evil. It is the totality of what has not been lived, not been acknowledged, or has been excluded from consciousness. Jung defined it clearly. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Collected Works, Volume 9. Part 2. The shadow consists of inner life pushed away because it does not fit the image we want to believe about ourselves. Repressed desires, anger that was never permitted expression, the need to be prioritized, to receive, to say no, all of this can reside in the shadow. And what Jung emphasized is this: the shadow does not disappear when denied. It finds a way back, most often through other people. This is the key point that helps us understand why we are drawn into exhausting relationships. We are not only drained by others, we are drawn by our own shadow being activated. Energy-draining individuals often serve as living mirrors for what we have not dared to live. Jung wrote his well-known line about this mechanism: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Collected Works, Volume 7. The victim activates in us the shadow of the rescuer, the part that wants to be needed in order to feel valuable. The narcissist activates the shadow of power, confidence, or the need to be prioritized, aspects we have learned to deny. The martyr activates the shadow of repressed anger, and the need to be seen, needs we have forbidden ourselves to acknowledge. In every case, the relationship is not merely an exchange between two people, but a meeting of shadows. When the shadow has not been made conscious, it is projected outward and seeks to live through another. Jung described this process through the concept of projection. Projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. Collected Works, Volume 10. When the shadow is projected, we no longer see the other person as they truly are. We see a version of ourselves distorted and displaced. And because the shadow carries repressed life energy, the relationship becomes intense, yet exhausting. Energy is released, but not in a nourishing way. It is burned up in conflict rescue fantasies and dependency. Jung believed that no relationship drains us unless it touches the shadow. If someone does not activate something unlived within us, they may be unpleasant, but they will not exhaust us. Exhaustion appears when we live our shadow through others instead of reclaiming it ourselves. This explains why many intelligent, self-aware people with boundaries still repeatedly fall into draining relationships, not because they do not know better, but because the shadow does not operate through reason. It operates through energy. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Collected Works, Volume 13. When the shadow has not been made conscious, it demands expression at any cost. And if it cannot be lived directly, it will live indirectly through relationships. We are drawn to energy drainers, not because they are strong, but because they allow our shadow to express itself, even if painfully. Here, Jung does not call us to self-blame. He saw the shadow as forgotten creative energy. When integrated, it no longer needs to sabotage. Jung emphasized that individuation requires reclaiming the shadow as part of the whole. Individuation is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual that is a separate, indivisible unity or whole. Collected Works, Volume 7. When we dare to acknowledge our anger, we no longer need others to carry it for us. When we dare to admit our need to be prioritized, we are no longer drawn to those who endlessly demand. When we dare to live our own power, creativity, or healthy selfishness, we no longer need to mirror it through narcissists. When the shadow is integrated, relationships change. Not because the other person changes first, but because the resonance disappears. Jung called this moment the withdrawal of projection, when energy returns to the subject. He wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. When you no longer need others to live the unlived parts of yourself, exhausting relationships naturally lose their power. They either transform or they end. No fighting is required. No angry severing. Only awareness. Thus, the shadow is not a reason to fear difficult relationships. It is the key to understanding them. Each time you feel drained, Jung would ask, which part of you is being called? That question is not meant to assign blame, but to liberate trapped life energy. When the shadow is seen, and integrated energy no longer needs to detour through other people, it returns to its rightful place, nourishing your own inner life. And there, relationships cease to be sites of depletion and become spaces of meeting between two whole individuals, without borrowing, without self-sacrifice. This is the moment Jung called true psychological maturity, no longer fleeing the shadow, no longer living through others, but becoming oneself whole. Once we have gone all the way into the shadow, the place where we understand that we are drawn into exhausting relationships because of the unlived parts within ourselves. A deeper, more painful layer gradually reveals itself. This is no longer only personal shadow, but primordial wounds formed very early in life, silently shaping our choices in love, family, and attachment. Jung understood this dynamic as the unconscious repetition of trauma, the psychological foundation of what we now call trauma bonding. In Carl Gustav Jung's system of thought, the psyche does not seek what is healthy first. It seeks what is familiar. When a wound has not been healed, abandonment, shame, rejection, it crystallizes into a complex that operates autonomously. That complex does not exist merely as memory. It actively seeks to recreate itself in the present. Jung wrote, "Complexes are psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies." Collected Works, Volume 8. A trauma bond forms when two complexes meet and recognize one another. The attachment arises very quickly, very intensely, and is often experienced as something fated. There is a sense of having known this person forever, as if they understand us at the deepest level. But according to Jung, this feeling does not arise from healthy compatibility. It arises from the resonance of wounds. The psyche is drawn to the place where it can repeat an old story with the unconscious hope that this time the ending will be different. Jung referred to this mechanism in analytical language as the compulsion to repeat an impulse that drives the psyche back to the site of its original pain, not to punish itself, but to complete what was left unfinished. Yet, without consciousness, repetition only reproduces suffering. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Collected Works, Volume 10. Within Trauma Bonds. This so-called fate is often disguised by beautiful narratives. We need each other. Only we truly understand one another. No one else could stay. But beneath these stories lies a difficult truth. The relationship survives by continually activating each other's wounds. The one who fears abandonment clings to the emotionally distant. The one burdened with shame is drawn to the judging other. The one who was rejected falls in love with someone unavailable. Psychic energy is drained because it is consumed in sustaining the trauma loop. Jung emphasized that a trauma bond is not deep love. It is dependence between complexes. When a complex takes over, the ego loses its freedom to choose. He wrote, "A complex can be so autonomous that it robs the ego of its energy." Collected Works, Volume 8. The exhaustion in these relationships does not come from surface conflict, but from prolonged emotional intensity. One remains in a constant state of vigilance, afraid of losing, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being abandoned again. Libido. The life energy is no longer available for creativity or growth. It is diverted into keeping the relationship from collapsing. And because the foundation is trauma, the bond holds together only through tension. The central point Jung repeatedly returned to is this trauma. Bonds exist because shadow and complexes have not been integrated. One is not only drawn to another person. One is drawn to a past version of oneself. Jung wrote about the link between emotional memory and the present. The emotional disturbance is the symptom of a complex at work. Collected Works, Volume 8. When a relationship consistently exhausts us, it is not a sign of great love. It is a sign that a complex is regulating our heartbeat. And a complex does not know how to love in a mature sense. It only knows how to demand repetition. Jung did not deny the pain of trauma bonds. He did not tell us to leave immediately. Instead, he invited a more difficult question. Which part of me is clinging to this pain because it feels familiar? For Jung, healing does not begin by changing the other, but by retrieving energy from the past. He wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." When we realize that a fated attachment is in fact an unconscious loyalty to old wounds, a small opening appears. We begin to separate the person in front of us from the wound behind them. We understand that intensity is not the same as compatibility, that peace may feel unfamiliar because our psyche has grown accustomed to storms. The Jungian solution to trauma bonding is not the denial of attachment, but its transformation through individuation. Jung defined it as follows. Individuation is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, that is, a separate, indivisible unity or whole. Collected Works, Volume 7. When we become whole, we no longer need another person to patch our wounds. We can be in relationship without having to activate pain in order to feel alive. Psychic energy is released from the old loop and returns to nourish the self. Thus, trauma bonds, however exhausting, carry a profound meaning. They point the way. They reveal where energy has been trapped the longest, where emotional memory still waits to be seen and held. When we dare to do that, the relationship either transforms in a healthier direction or naturally dissolves. There is no longer blind fate, only conscious choice. Jung did not promise that this path would be easy, but he affirmed that the reward is inner freedom, a place where life energy is no longer drained by the past. And at that point, love ceases to be a repetition of trauma. It becomes a meeting between two people who have learned how to remain with themselves. Once we have moved through trauma bonding, where we understand that exhausting attachment is not destiny, but an unconscious loyalty to old wounds, a vital question opens before us. What path allows us to protect and restore our energy without cutting people out of our lives? Here the thought of Carl Gustav Jung reveals itself as especially profound and humane. Jung did not advise cutting people off. He invited a more difficult, more enduring journey, becoming whole. When inner wholeness emerges, energy-draining relationships naturally lose their power, building psychological boundaries, returning energy to its rightful place. In Jungian language, boundaries are not walls against others, but boundaries of the ego, the capacity to distinguish what is mine from what is not mine. When the ego is weak, projection, identification, and resonance intrude. Energy flows in the wrong direction. Jung warned with striking clarity. Where the will of the ego is weak, there the unconscious will overpower it. Collected works. Psychological boundaries are built through awareness. Awareness that this emotion does not belong to me. This responsibility is not mine. This rhythm of life is not my rhythm. Each honest no strengthens the ego. And when the ego stands firm, energy is no longer siphoned off to stabilize others. Shadow work. Reclaiming repressed energy. Jung did not see the shadow as an enemy. He saw it as forgotten life energy. When the shadow is denied, its energy finds detours through relationships, creating exhaustion. Therefore, protecting energy cannot be separated from shadow work. Acknowledging repressed anger, the need to be prioritized, the longing for power or freedom that we once disowned. Jung wrote his famous line as a compass for this path. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Collected works. When the shadow is seen and integrated, energy no longer needs to sabotage. It returns to serve life, creativity, boundaries, and calm presence. From there, relationships are no longer places where energy is burned to live out our unlived parts, developing inner authority, ending the need for validation. Much exhaustion arises from dependence on validation. We give to be recognized. We stay to avoid abandonment. We endure to preserve a role. Jung called this living under external authority, in contrast to inner authority. When inner authority has not formed, the ego seeks value from others. Responses and energy is continually pulled outward. Jung emphasized the opposite path. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Developing inner authority means learning to listen to signals from within: fatigue, boredom, constriction, heaviness as precise messages from the psyche. When we trust these signals more than others, expectation's energy begins to return. We give because we have surplus, not because we need to be needed. Anchoring in the self, a sustainable source of renewal. Above all, Jung centered his work on the self, the total center of the psyche beyond the ego. The ego manages daily life. The self regulates life energy. When we live far from the self, energy disperses. When we anchor in the self, energy, self renews. Jung described the self as follows. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. Collected works. Anchoring in the self is not a quick technique. It is a living relationship cultivated through silence, reflection, dreams, and honesty with oneself. When the self leads the ego, no longer strains. Relationships no longer need to be destined to hold energy together. When wholeness appears, the power to drain dissolves. The central point of the Jungian path is this: we do not need to fix others. When we become whole, establishing boundaries, integrating the shadow living from inner authority, and anchoring in the self-unconscious, resonance fades. Jung called this moment the withdrawal of projection. He wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." When projection is withdrawn, energy returns to the subject. Relationships that once drained energy either transform because there is no longer fuel, or naturally fall away without fighting, without angry severing. Only psychological truth is required. Conclusion: protecting energy through maturity. Jung did not promise a life without difficulty. He promised something deeper, inner freedom. Protecting and restoring energy does not come from shrinking life, but from expanding consciousness. When we take responsibility for our inner world, energy no longer has to detour through others in order to live. At that point, relationships cease to be sites of depletion. They become spaces of meeting between two fulfilled human beings. No borrowing, no self-sacrifice, no repetition of wounds. This is the destination of the Jungian path to live in the world without losing the source of life within. So we have gently walked through the journey together. And before we close, take a moment to look back at yourself. Carl Jung believed that we are not exhausted because the world is too heavy, but because we have carried too much that does not belong to us. When life energy is drained, It is not a sign of weakness. It is an invitation to return to the self. If along this journey you recognized familiar relationships, patterns, or shadows within yourself, consider that recognition a step forward in consciousness. If you would like to continue exploring the human psyche through the lens of Carl Jung shadow, individuation, inner authority, and the path toward a more whole way of living, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment sharing what touched you most today. Because as Jung emphasized, the most important journey of a human life is to become oneself. I look forward to meeting you on the next journey.